The photograph slipped from the dead man's wallet and landed face up on the marble floor of Dante Morti's penthouse office. And for 3 full seconds, the most feared crime boss in Chicago forgot how to breathe. He'd killed Anthony Russo himself. 2 bullets, close range, no hesitation. Because Russo had stolen from him, lied to his face, and cost him a shipment worth $3 million. The body was still warm on the Persian rug when Dante's lieutenant, Marco, emptied Russo's pockets looking for evidence, looking for names, looking for anything that would lead them to whoever else was involved in the betrayal. What they found instead was a wallet containing $200 in cash, a fake driver's license, and a single photograph tucked behind the ID slot. The woman in the picture had dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of storm clouds. She was laughing at something beyond the camera's frame, caught mid-motion with one hand raised to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The photo was worn at the edges, creased down the middle as though it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were 4 words that made Dante's blood run cold. "Elena, always my daughter." Dante had spent 6 years building an empire in Chicago's underworld, 6 years earning a reputation for ruthlessness that made grown men flinch when he entered a room, and not once in all that time had anyone managed to surprise him. But this photograph of a woman who looked exactly like someone he'd known a lifetime ago, carried by a man he'd just executed for theft, this unraveled something fundamental in his chest. "Boss," Marco's voice cut through the silence. "You know her." Dante bent down and picked up the photograph with hands that didn't quite feel like his own. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The shape of her face, the curve of her smile, the specific way her eyes crinkled at the corners, it was all too familiar. "Find out everything about this woman," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Her full name, where she lives, what she does, who she talks to. I want to know what time she wakes up in the morning and what she eats for breakfast. And I want it by tomorrow." Marco nodded and disappeared, leaving Dante alone with the photograph and the corpse. He stared at the image for a long time, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. If Anthony Russo had a daughter, and if that daughter was who Dante thought she might be, then everything about the last 6 years, every decision, every alliance, every drop of blood spilled, might have been built on a foundation of lies. The next morning arrived with Marco's report and a sick feeling in Dante's stomach. Elena Russo, age 26, worked as a trauma nurse at Cook County Hospital. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Pilsen, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and had student loans totaling $83,000. Her mother had died when she was 12. Her father, Anthony Russo, had been in and out of her life, mostly out, and according to the surveillance photos Marco had gathered, she hadn't seen him in at least 2 years. She had no idea her father was dead. She had no idea Dante existed. She went to work, came home, sometimes met friends for coffee, and lived an ordinary life that had nothing to do with the blood-soaked world her father had inhabited. And she looked exactly like Sophia. Dante closed the file and pressed his palms against the edge of his desk until the wood bit into his skin. Sophia Castellano had been his first love, back when he was 17, and stupid enough to believe that love mattered more than loyalty to the family. She'd been the daughter of a rival family's lieutenant, and their relationship had been secret and doomed from the start. When her father found out, he'd sent her away to Europe, Dante had heard, though he'd never been able to confirm it. He'd looked for her for years, spent money and resources and favors trying to track her down, but she'd vanished like smoke. Now, 26 years later, a young woman who could be Sophia's twin was working night shifts at a hospital in Chicago, unaware that her father's choices had just put a target on her back. Because Dante's enemies wouldn't care that Elena was innocent. They'd care that she was Anthony Russo's daughter, and if any of them found out about her before Dante secured the situation, they'd use her as leverage or kill her outright just to make a point. The Chicago underworld was full of men who understood the value of bloodline revenge, and Russo had stolen from more people than just Dante. He had 2 choices. He could eliminate the potential threat, 1 bullet, quick and clean, and no one would ever connect Elena Russo to the mess her father had left behind. Or he could do something monumentally stupid and keep her alive long enough to figure out if she knew anything about Russo's other associates, his hiding places, his backup plans. The photograph was still on his desk. In the morning light streaming through the windows, Elena's smile seemed to mock him. "Get the car ready," Dante told Marco when his lieutenant appeared in the doorway. "We're going to the hospital." Cook County Hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation, a combination that made Dante's jaw clench as he walked through the emergency department entrance. He'd been in hospitals before, visiting soldiers who'd been shot, collecting debts from administrators who owed him favors, but never for something like this. Marco walked 2 steps behind him, silent and watchful, while 2 more of Dante's men waited in the black SUV outside. Elena Russo was working the trauma unit on the 4th floor. Dante had memorized her schedule from Marco's report: 12-hour shifts, 3 days a week, always arriving 15 minutes early and leaving 30 minutes late. She was dedicated, her supervisor's notes said. Compassionate. Good with the difficult patients who came through the doors with gunshot wounds and knife injuries, and the kinds of trauma that only happened in the parts of the city where Dante's influence ran deepest. He found her at the nurse's station, bent over a chart with a pen tucked behind her ear and exhaustion written in the set of her shoulders. She was wearing purple scrubs and white sneakers, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started to come loose over the course of her shift. When she looked up at the sound of his footsteps, her storm gray eyes met his with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. Up close, the resemblance to Sophia was even more striking. The same high cheekbones, the same full mouth, the same small scar above her left eyebrow. Those Sophia's had come from a childhood fall, and Dante had no idea how Elena had gotten hers. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't think of anything except the weight of the gun at his back and the photograph in his jacket pocket. "I need to speak with you about your father," he said finally. Something shifted in her expression, a guardedness that suggested she'd had this conversation before. "I don't know where he is," she said, and her voice had gone flat and careful. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. If he owes you money, that's between you and him. He's dead." The words came out harder than Dante intended, and he watched her face go pale. She set down the pen with deliberate care, and her hand trembled slightly as she did it. I don't understand." "Your father was involved in business that got him killed," Dante said. "And right now, I need to know if anyone else knows about you. Friends of his, associates, people he might have mentioned you to." Elena stood up slowly, and he could see her mind working behind those gray eyes, processing the information and trying to figure out who he was and what he wanted. "I haven't seen my father in 2 years," she said. "We weren't close. He'd show up every 6 months or so, give me some cash, tell me he was working on something big, and then disappear again. I stopped asking questions when I was 16. Did he ever introduce you to anyone, business partners, friends?" "No." She crossed her arms over her chest, and Dante recognized the defensive posture. "Who are you?" He could lie. He should lie. But something about the way she was looking at him, direct and unflinching despite the fear he could see in the tight corners of her mouth, made him choose honesty. "My name is Dante Morty. Your father stole from me, and I killed him for it. And right now, you're in danger because of choices he made that have nothing to do with you." She took a step back, and her shoulder blades hit the counter behind her. You killed my father." "Yes. And you came here to tell me that. To what? Tie up loose ends?" There was something fierce in her voice now, something that reminded him of Sophia in the moments when she'd pushed back against her family's expectations and insisted on making her own choices. "I came here to figure out if you're a threat or a victim," Dante said. "Because if anyone else in my world finds out about you, they won't bother asking questions before they act." Elena's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying you killed my father, and now I'm supposed to trust you to keep me safe from the other people who wanted him dead?" "I'm saying you don't have a choice." The trauma unit's overhead lights flickered, and somewhere down the hall, a machine started beeping in an urgent rhythm. Elena glanced toward the sound, and Dante could see the conflict playing out across her face. duty to her patients warring with the sudden reality that her world had just tilted sideways into something dark and dangerous. "I have 4 more hours on my shift," she said finally. "People here depend on me." "Your shift ends early today," Dante told her. "Tell your supervisor there's a family emergency. Because that's not a lie. You're coming with me, and we're going somewhere safe until I can figure out how deep your father's betrayal went." For a long moment, she just stared at him, and he could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She was smart, he realized. Smart enough to know that arguing wouldn't change the situation. Smart enough to understand that her ordinary life had just ended the moment he'd walked through those doors. "Let me get my things," she said quietly. Marco moved to follow her, but Dante held up a hand. "Wait here." He didn't know why he said it, didn't know why he felt the need to give her this small measure of privacy, but something in his chest tightened when he saw the resignation in the set of her shoulders as she walked toward the staff locker room. She emerged 10 minutes later in jeans and a gray sweater, a backpack slung over one shoulder and her hair still pulled back in that loose ponytail. Her supervisor, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, was standing at the nurse's station with a concerned expression, but Alina just shook her head and said something too quiet for Dante to hear. Then she turned and walked toward him, and her eyes were dry but her hands were shaking. "Let's go," she said. The drive to Dante's safe house in Lincoln Park took 20 minutes through mid-morning traffic. Alina sat in the back seat of the SUV next to Dante, staring out the window at the city passing by. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions, and the silence stretched between them like a living thing. Marco drove with his usual efficiency, and the 2 soldiers in the front seat kept their weapons ready, but out of sight. The safe house was a renovated brownstone on a quiet tree-lined street, the kind of place that blended seamlessly into the neighborhood's expensive architecture. Dante had bought it 3 years ago under a shell company, and only his most trusted people knew it existed. The first floor held a living room, kitchen, and office. The second floor had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The basement was soundproofed and equipped with everything he needed for interrogations that required privacy. Alina stopped in the middle of the living room and turned to face him. "How long am I staying here? Until I know you're not in danger." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." Dante gestured toward the stairs. "There are clothes in the bedroom on the right and the kitchen is stocked. Marco will be outside if you need anything." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression made him feel like she was seeing straight through all the armor he'd built around himself over the years. "You didn't have to tell me the truth," she said quietly. "About killing my father, you could have lied. Would you have preferred that? I don't know." She hitched her backpack higher on her shoulder. "But I think you didn't tell me because you wanted to. I think you told me because you felt guilty about something, and it wasn't just about my father." She was too perceptive. Dante felt something twist in his chest, and he forced his expression into neutrality. "Get some rest. We'll talk more later." Alina nodded and headed upstairs, and Dante waited until he heard the bedroom door close before he allowed himself to move. He pulled the photograph from his jacket pocket and stared at it again, at the familiar features and the ghost of a woman he'd loved 26 years ago. If Alina was Sophia's daughter, and every instinct he had screamed that she was, then Anthony Russo had been more than just a thief. He'd been the man who'd somehow ended up with Sophia after she disappeared, the man who'd had a life with her while Dante was building an empire in Chicago. And if that was true, then killing Russo hadn't been justice. It had been something far more complicated and far more painful. Marco appeared in the doorway to the living room, his phone in hand. "Boss, we have a problem. Word's getting out about Russo. Salvator's crew is asking questions, and they know he had family." Dante's hand tightened around the photograph. "Tell Salvator that Russo's affairs are handled, and anyone who comes looking for leverage will find themselves on the wrong end of a very permanent conversation. He won't back off that easy. He lost money on Russo's deal too. Then make him understand that backing off is in his best interest." Dante slid the photograph back into his pocket. "And find out everything you can about Sofia Castellano, where she went after she left Chicago, who she was with, what happened to her. I want answers by tonight." Marco's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the closest he ever came to showing surprise, but he nodded and disappeared to make the calls. Dante walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street, at the normal world where people went to work and came home and didn't worry about whether their father's crimes would get them killed. Upstairs, he could hear the faint sound of water running. Alina was showering, washing away the hospital's smell and probably trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Dante wondered what she was thinking, whether she was planning to run or whether she'd accepted that running wouldn't solve anything. He wondered if she hated him yet for killing her father, or if the complicated relationship she described meant her grief would be tangled up with relief and resentment, and all the messy emotions that came with losing someone who'd never really been present in your life to begin with. The water shut off upstairs, and Dante turned away from the window. He had work to do, calls to make, threats to issue, a network to manage, but for the first time in 6 years, his mind wasn't fully on the empire he'd built. Instead, he kept thinking about a photograph and a woman who might hold the answers to questions he'd stopped asking a long time ago. By evening, Marco had returned with information that confirmed Dante's worst suspicions and best hopes all at once. Sofia Castellano had left Chicago 27 years ago when her family discovered her relationship with Dante. She'd been sent to stay with relatives in Boston, but she'd run away from them 6 months later. No one knew where she'd gone after that, but 9 months after she'd left Chicago, a birth certificate had been filed in Detroit for a baby girl named Alina Marie Castellano. Castellano, Dante said slowly. Not Russo. The father's name on the birth certificate was listed as unknown, Marco continued. Sophia died in Detroit 12 years ago, car accident. Alina was 14. She ended up in foster care for 2 years before she aged out and got herself into nursing school on scholarships. And Anthony Russo. Near as I can tell, he didn't enter the picture until Alina was in her late teens. Could be he met Sophia before she died. Could be he showed up after and took an interest in the kid. Records are messy, but there's no indication he legally adopted her or that she ever changed her name to Russo. She's still Alina Castellano in all the official paperwork. Dante leaned back in his chair, processing the timeline. If Sophia had gotten pregnant before she'd left Chicago, if she'd been carrying his child when her family sent her away, then Alina wasn't just a woman who looked like his first love. She was his daughter. The thought hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and making the room tilt sideways. He'd spent 6 years building power and control, and in one afternoon, a photograph and a birth certificate had unraveled everything he thought he knew about his own life. Boss, Marco's voice was careful. You okay? Find out how Russo met Sophia, Dante said, and his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. Find out what their relationship was, and find out why he's been carrying Alina's picture around for the last 2 years when she says she hasn't seen him. Marco nodded and left, and Dante sat alone in the office with the weight of revelation pressing down on his shoulders. Upstairs, Alina was probably hungry, probably scared, probably wondering if the man who'd killed her father was going to kill her too. And he had no idea how to tell her that everything was more complicated than either of them had imagined. He found her in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a glass of water in her hand, and her wet hair leaving damp spots on the shoulders of the borrowed t-shirt she was wearing. She looked younger in the casual clothes, more vulnerable, and Dante felt something protective and unfamiliar stir in his chest. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She turned to look at him, and her expression was guarded. "I'm not sure I can eat right now. You should try." He moved to the refrigerator and started pulling out ingredients: bread, cheese, deli meat, vegetables. "When's the last time you ate?" "This morning. Before my shift." She watched him assemble sandwiches with movements that were probably more careful than necessary. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" "Pretend to care." "I know what this is. I'm leverage or insurance or whatever you call it in your world. You're keeping me alive because it serves some purpose, not because you actually give a damn about whether I'm hungry." Dante set down the knife and met her eyes. "You think you have me figured out. I think I've met enough men like you in the ER to know how this works. The guys who come in with gunshot wounds and gang tattoos, the ones who threaten the staff and act like they own the place, they're all the same. They care about power and control, and everything else is just window dressing. And you think I'm like them, aren't you? She took a sip of water, and her hand was steady now. You killed my father. You showed up at my job and basically kidnapped me. You brought me here and told me I don't have a choice about staying. That's not the behavior of someone who cares about my well-being. That's the behavior of someone who's used to getting what he wants no matter who gets hurt in the process. She was right, of course. She was absolutely right. And the fact that she had the courage to say it to his face while standing in his safe house and wearing his borrowed clothes made something in Dante's chest crack open. Your father, he said carefully, was not the man you thought he was. I know, he was a criminal who stole from other criminals and got himself killed for it. You already told me that. That's not what I meant. Dante pushed the sandwich across the counter toward her. Eat, and then I'll tell you what I found out today, and you can decide for yourself whether I'm just like the men in your ER or whether there's more to this situation than you understand. Alina looked at the sandwich, then at him, and finally picked it up with obvious reluctance. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. I'm listening. Your mother's name was Sofia Castellano, Dante said, and watched her eyes widen slightly. She and I were together when we were 17. Her family found out about our relationship and sent her away to Boston. I never saw her again. Alina set down the sandwich. You're saying you knew my mother. I'm saying I loved your mother. And I spent years trying to find her after she disappeared. He pulled out the photograph and placed it on the counter between them. When I found this picture in your father's wallet yesterday, the first thing I thought was that you looked exactly like her. And then I started asking questions, and the answers I got tonight suggest that Anthony Russo wasn't your biological father. The silence that followed was sharp and fragile. Alina stared at the photograph, her face gone pale, and Dante could see her mind working through the implications. You're saying you think you're my father? I don't think. I know. He pulled out his phone and showed her the birth certificate information Marco had sent over. Your mother left Chicago pregnant. She gave birth to you 9 months later in Detroit. The father was listed as unknown, but the timing matches perfectly. Alina took the phone with shaking hands and read through the information. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. This doesn't make sense. Why would Anthony Russo? Why would he pretend to be my father if he wasn't? Why would he carry my picture around? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Dante took the phone back. But what I know for certain is that you're in danger because of choices Russo made. And now that I know who you really are, I'm not letting anyone touch you. She laughed, and it was a bitter, broken sound. So what, you kill the man I thought was my father, and then you show up and tell me you're actually my real father, and I'm just supposed to accept that? I'm supposed to trust you. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm telling you how things are. How things are, she repeated. How things are is that my entire life is a lie. How things are is that I've been working myself to death to pay off student loans and keep a roof over my head, while apparently my real father has been running a criminal empire in Chicago. How things are is that I don't know who I am anymore, and the one person who could have given me answers is dead because you killed him. Her voice had risen, and tears were streaming down her face now, and Dante felt completely out of his depth. He'd faced down rival bosses and federal agents and assassination attempts, but he had no idea how to handle a crying woman who had every right to hate him. I can't change what I did, he said quietly, and I can't give you back the years we lost, but I can keep you safe now, and I can find out why Russo was in your life and what he was really after. Alina wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. What if I don't want to be safe? What if I just want to go back to my apartment and my job and my normal life? You can't. That life ended the moment I found your photograph. Dante moved around the counter, and he was careful to keep his distance, careful not to crowd her. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to believe me or to think I'm anything other than a monster. But you're my daughter, Alina. And that means something to me, even if it means nothing to you. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes, grief and anger and confusion all tangled up with the desperate human need to believe that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this chaos. I need time, she said finally. I need to process this, alone. Dante nodded and stepped back. Take all the time you need, but don't leave this house, please. She picked up the sandwich and the glass of water and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Dante listened to her footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close, and then stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by the remains of a conversation that had changed everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Salvator's pushing harder. Says he knows about the girl. Says he wants to talk. Dante typed back a single word. No. Then he pulled up the birth certificate photo again and stared at the date. 26 years ago, Sophia had been alone in Detroit, pregnant and scared, while Dante had been in Chicago building the foundations of his empire. She'd never tried to contact him, never told him about the baby. Had she thought he wouldn't care? Had she thought he'd be angry? Or had her family made sure she couldn't reach him, even if she'd wanted to? He'd never know the answers now. Sophia was dead, and all he had were the fragments she'd left behind. A daughter who didn't know him, a photograph in a dead man's wallet, and questions that multiplied with every passing hour. Upstairs, Alina's light was still on. Dante could see the glow under her door from where he stood at the bottom of the stairs. He wanted to go up there, wanted to explain everything, wanted to somehow bridge the impossible gap between who he was and who she needed him to be. But he'd learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't make it real, and sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was to give them space to grieve. So he went back to his office and started making phone calls. If Salvator knew about Alina, then others would know soon too. And Dante needed to send a message that would make it very clear what would happen to anyone who tried to use his daughter against him. The next morning brought violence to Dante's doorstep in the form of 3 cars and 12 armed men who surrounded the safe house just after dawn. Dante was awake. He'd barely slept, and he saw them coming through the security cameras he'd installed on every corner of the property. He recognized Salvator's lieutenant, a vicious man named Gino who'd earned his reputation by torturing information out of people who crossed the family. Marco was already moving, already coordinating with the 4 soldiers Dante had stationed around the perimeter, but Dante knew how this would play out. Salvator wanted to make a point, wanted to show that he wasn't afraid of Dante's threats, and the only way to do that was to come in hard and fast and make it clear that Alina was vulnerable. Dante grabbed his gun and headed upstairs. Alina's door was closed, and when he knocked, she answered immediately, already awake and dressed. She took one look at his face and understood. "What's happening?" "We're leaving." Now, he pulled her into the hallway and toward the back stairs. "There are men outside who want to use you to get to me, and we don't have time for questions." They made it to the first floor before the shooting started. Glass shattered in the living room, and Dante heard Marco shouting orders and returning fire. Alina flinched at the sound, and Dante pulled her against the wall, his body between her and the chaos. "There's a car in the garage," he told her. "When I say run, and you don't stop until you're in that car. Understand?" She nodded, her face pale but her eyes focused. Dante liked that about her. Even terrified, she didn't fall apart. He moved toward the door that led to the attached garage, and Alina followed close behind. More gunfire erupted from the front of the house, and Dante could hear breaking wooden men shouting in Italian. Marco was holding them off, but it wouldn't last long. Salvator had sent too many men, and they'd come prepared for a siege. The garage was empty except for a black sedan with bulletproof windows and run-flat tires. Dante shoved Alina toward the passenger side and started the engine. "Get in and stay down." The garage door opened with agonizing slowness, and Dante saw 2 of Salvator's men running toward them from the side yard. He threw the car into reverse and punched the accelerator, and the sedan shot backward into the driveway. Bullets pinged off the reinforced metal, and Alina made a small sound of fear but stayed low in her seat like he'd told her. Dante spun the wheel and shifted into drive, and then they were racing down the quiet Lincoln Park Street at 70 miles an hour with 2 cars in pursuit. He could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police, which meant this would get messy fast. But right now, his only priority was getting Alina somewhere safe. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Someplace they won't think to look." Dante took a hard right and then a left, weaving through residential streets and forcing the pursuing cars to fall back. His phone was ringing, Marco, probably, checking in, but he couldn't answer it with both hands on the wheel and bullets still occasionally sparking off the car's armor. They made it to the highway, and Dante pushed the sedan up to 90, threading between slower traffic and using every evasion technique he'd learned in 20 years of staying alive in a dangerous world. The pursuing cars fell back eventually, either losing them in traffic or deciding that a high-speed chase on the expressway was too public for their purposes. Elena sat up slowly when the immediate danger had passed. "Is Marco okay?" The question surprised him. She'd met Marco exactly once, and he'd been part of the team that had essentially kidnapped her yesterday. But she'd asked anyway, and Dante found himself respecting her compassion even in the middle of chaos. "He's alive. He knows how to handle himself." Dante glanced at her. "You did good back there. You stayed calm. I work in a trauma unit. I'm used to emergencies." But her hands were shaking slightly where they rested on her knees, and Dante could see the adrenaline crash starting to hit her. "Are they going to keep coming after us?" "Yes." "Why? What did Anthony Russo do that makes me worth this much trouble?" Dante took the exit toward O'Hare Airport, but instead of heading to the terminals, he turned toward a private airfield where he kept a small jet for emergencies exactly like this one. "Russo didn't just steal money from me. He stole money from 4 other families, and he was planning to disappear with all of it. Your photograph in his wallet tells me he was planning to take you with him when he ran, which means he cared about you more than I gave him credit for." Elena absorbed this in silence. "So everyone thinks I know where the money is." "Yes, but I don't. I had no idea about any of this until yesterday." "I know, but they don't, and they won't believe you even if you tell them." Dante pulled up to the airfield's security gate and rolled down his window. The guard recognized him immediately and waved them through without questions. "Which is why we're leaving Chicago until I can sort this out." "Leaving Chicago," Elena repeated. "To go where?" "Miami. I have a place there, and Salvador's reach doesn't extend that far south." Dante parked near the hangar where his jet was kept, and he could see the pilot already running through pre-flight checks. "Come on. We need to be in the air in the next 10 minutes. Elena got out of the car slowly, and Dante could see her taking in the private airfield, the expensive jet, the casual wealth that came with being at the top of the criminal food chain. "This is your life," she said quietly. "Private jets and bulletproof cars and people trying to kill you. Yes, and now it's my life too. For now." Dante guided her toward the plane, his hand light on her lower back. "But I'm going to fix this, Elena. I'm going to find out where Russo hid the money, and I'm going to make sure Salvador and everyone else understands that you're off limits." She stopped at the base of the stairs leading up to the jet and turned to face him. "Why do you care? You didn't even know I existed until yesterday. You could have just killed me when you found my picture and eliminated the problem." It was the same question she'd asked in different ways since they'd met, and Dante was starting to realize that she needed to hear the answer as much as he needed to say it. "Because you're my daughter," he said simply. "And because I loved your mother, and I'm not going to let her memory be tainted by letting the one thing she left behind get destroyed by men like Salvador." Elena's eyes were bright with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be your daughter or how to trust you or how to survive in a world where people shoot at me before breakfast. You don't have to know. You just have to not give up." Dante reached out and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, the same gesture she'd been making in the photograph. "And I'll handle the rest." She nodded slowly and climbed the stairs into the jet. Dante followed, and 5 minutes later they were taxiing down the runway while Chicago disappeared behind them in the early morning light. The flight to Miami took 3 hours, and Elena spent most of it staring out the window in silence. Dante made phone calls, checking on Marco, coordinating with his people in Florida, trying to track down any information about where Russo might have hidden the stolen money. The total haul was close to $12 million, split between 5 families, and all of it had vanished when Russo died. "I need to search Russo's apartment," Dante told Marco over the phone. And his storage units, his safe deposit boxes, anywhere he might have kept records. Already on it, boss. We found a key in his shoe. Looks like it goes to a storage facility in Gary, Indiana. Sending a team there now. Good. And Marco, make sure Salvator knows that if he comes after Alina again, I'm burning his entire operation to the ground. He knows. He's just testing to see if you mean it. I mean it. Dante ended the call and looked over at Alina. She'd fallen asleep against the window, her face softened by unconsciousness and exhaustion. She looked young and vulnerable, and nothing like the fierce woman who'd stood up to him in her hospital's trauma unit. He pulled a blanket from the overhead compartment and draped it over her carefully, and she didn't wake. When they landed in Miami, a car was waiting to take them to Dante's penthouse in South Beach. The building was exclusive and secure, with a doorman who knew better than to ask questions and a private elevator that went straight to the top floor. The penthouse itself was decorated in minimalist modern style, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the ocean. Alina walked through the space with wide eyes, and Dante could see her trying to reconcile this version of his life with the violence they'd fled that morning. How many places like this do you have? 4. Chicago, Miami, New York, and Vegas. He set down the keys and turned to face her. You'll be safe here. The building's security is top tier, and no one knows about this place except my inner circle. So I'm just supposed to wait here while you figure out how to fix the problem I represent. You're supposed to rest and let me handle the situation. You're a trauma nurse, not a soldier. This isn't your fight. Something flashed in her eyes, anger, maybe, or frustration. It became my fight the moment you walked into my hospital. You don't get to make decisions about what I'm supposed to do just because you're my biological father. I'm making decisions to keep you alive. No, you're making decisions to maintain control. That's what you do, right? You control situations and people and outcomes, and you don't know how to handle it when something doesn't fit into your neat categories of threat or asset. She was right again, and Dante was starting to understand that his daughter had inherited more than just Sophia's looks. She had the same sharp intelligence, the same refusal to be intimidated, the same way of seeing straight through bullshit to the truth underneath. Fine, he said. You want to be part of this. Then we start by figuring out what Russo was really doing in your life. Because he wasn't just playing surrogate father out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted something from you, or he was protecting you from something, and we need to know which. Alina crossed her arms. How do we do that? We go through everything you remember about him. Every conversation, every gift, every odd question or unusual behavior. And we see if there's a pattern that points us toward whatever he was hiding. They spent the afternoon on the penthouse's terrace, with the Miami sun beating down and the sound of waves in the distance, while Alina walked Dante through her complicated relationship with the man she'd thought was her father. Russo had shown up when she was 16, she said, about 2 years after Sophia died. He'd appeared at her foster home claiming to be an old friend of her mother's, and he'd started sending her money, never enough to be suspicious, just a couple $100 here and there to help with expenses. He said he felt responsible for me because he'd cared about my mom, Alina explained. And I was desperate enough that I didn't ask too many questions. The money helped me get out of foster care and into a cheap apartment, and then it helped me pay for nursing school when my scholarships didn't cover everything. Did he ever ask you for anything in return? No. That's what was weird about it. He never wanted anything except to make sure I was okay. He'd visit every few months, take me to dinner, ask about school or work, and then he'd give me more cash and disappear again. Did he ever talk about his work or his past? Never. If I asked, he'd change the subject. I figured he was involved in something illegal, but I didn't want to know the details. I just wanted the help. Dante processed this, trying to fit the pieces together. A man who'd stolen millions from dangerous families had been quietly supporting a young woman for 10 years without asking for anything. It didn't make sense unless Russo had genuinely cared about Alina, unless keeping her safe and helping her build a life had been important to him for reasons that went beyond money or leverage. Did he ever give you anything besides money? Jewelry, documents, a safety deposit box key? Alina shook her head. Just cash and one other thing, a medallion that belonged to my mom. He gave it to me on my 21st birthday and said she'd wanted me to have it. Dante sat up straighter. Do you still have it? It's at my apartment, in my jewelry box. Alina looked at him with sudden understanding. You think there's something hidden in it? I think if Russo was sentimental enough to keep your photograph in his wallet, he might have been sentimental enough to hide something important in an object he knew you'd keep safe. Dante pulled out his phone and called Marco. I need you to get into Alina's apartment and retrieve a medallion from her jewelry box. Be careful. If Salvador's people are watching the place, they'll be waiting for exactly this kind of move. While Marco coordinated the retrieval, Dante ordered dinner and tried to give Alina space to process everything. She stood at the terrace railing, looking out at the ocean, and he could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't how he'd imagined meeting his daughter, if he'd ever let himself imagine it at all. He'd pictured some fantasy where Sophia showed up one day with a child, both of them needing him, both of them giving him a chance to build the family he'd lost when her father had sent her away. Instead, he had a traumatized young woman who had every reason to hate him, a criminal war brewing back in Chicago, and the ghost of choices made 26 years ago haunting every interaction. Tell me about my mother, Alina said without turning around. Not the story about how you met or how her family sent her away. Tell me what she was like as a person. Dante joined her at the railing, and for a moment he let himself remember. She was stubborn, refused to follow anyone's rules if she didn't agree with them. She wanted to be a doctor, and her family wanted her to marry someone from their world and have babies and be decorative. We used to meet in secret at this little diner on the South Side, and she'd tell me about all the places she wanted to go, all the things she wanted to do that had nothing to do with the life her family had planned for her. Did she love you? I thought so. But maybe she loved the idea of escape more than she loved me specifically. I'll never know. Dante paused. She would have been proud of you, Alina. Becoming a nurse, helping people, building a life on your own terms, that's everything she wanted for herself. Alina was quiet for a long time. I wish I'd known you were out there. I wish she'd told me before she died. Maybe she thought she was protecting you. My world isn't safe, and she knew that better than anyone. But she let Anthony Russo into my life, and he was part of that same world. Which is why I need to figure out what he really wanted. Dante's phone buzzed, a text from Marco with a photo attached. The medallion was gold and circular, about the size of a silver dollar, with an intricate design etched into the surface. But what caught Dante's attention was the seam running around the edge, barely visible, but definitely there. It opens, Alina said, leaning over to look at the photo. I never knew that. I thought it was just a solid piece. Marco's next text confirmed it. Medallion has a hidden compartment. Contains a folded piece of paper and a USB drive. What do you want me to do with it? Dante typed back, secure them and catch the next flight to Miami. Don't let anyone follow you. Alina was staring at the photo with something like wonder on her face. He hid something important inside my mother's medallion and gave it to me, knowing I'd keep it safe. That's actually kind of brilliant. It's also dangerous. If what's on that USB drive is what I think it is, then Salvador and the other families will tear apart everything you've ever touched to find it. Dante pulled her away from the railing and back into the penthouse, which means we need to be ready for anything when Marco gets here. The next 12 hours passed in tense waiting. Dante coordinated with his people in Chicago, making sure that Salvador's crew was contained and that no one else came looking for Alina. He set up additional security around the Miami penthouse and made sure the escape routes were clear if things went sideways. And he watched Alina, who'd commandeered his laptop and was researching everything she could find about criminal money laundering, hidden accounts, and the various ways people disappeared assets. You don't have to understand all this, Dante told her at one point. Yes, I do, because you're going to use whatever's on that USB drive to fix this situation, and I need to know exactly what that means and what the consequences will be. She looked up from the laptop with determination written all over her face. I'm not a passive victim in this, Dante. If I'm your daughter, then I have as much right to understand the family business as anyone. The family business isn't something to be proud of. Maybe not. But it's kept you alive for 26 years, which means it's kept me alive too, even if I didn't know it. She closed the laptop. And if I'm going to survive in your world, I need to understand how it works. Marco arrived just before midnight with the medallion and USB drive secured in a locked case. He looked exhausted and had a fresh cut above his left eyebrow, but he was alive and whole. Salvator's people were watching the apartment, he confirmed. Had to go in through the building's maintenance entrance and out through the parking garage. Lost them somewhere around Cicero Avenue. Dante took the case and opened it carefully. The medallion was exactly as it appeared in the photo, beautiful and innocuous and hiding secrets inside its gold shell. He pried it open with careful fingers, and the hidden compartment revealed a tightly folded piece of paper and a small USB drive wrapped in plastic. The paper was a letter written in Russo's handwriting. "Alina, if you're reading this, then I'm dead and someone's figured out what I did. The USB drive contains account information for $12 million that I stole from people who deserved to lose it. I did it to make sure you'd never have to worry about money, never have to struggle the way your mother struggled. I know I wasn't your real father, but I loved you like you were mine, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there to help you use this money safely. The password is your mother's birthday backwards. Be smart, be careful, and don't trust anyone except Dante Morty. He's the only one who'll understand why I did this, and he's the only one who has the power to protect you once the truth comes out. Tell him I'm sorry for stealing from him, and tell him Sophia never stopped loving him." Anthony Alina read the letter over Dante's shoulder, and he heard her breath catch. "He knew about you. He knew you were my real father, and he was trying to protect me by giving me leverage. Leverage and a target." Dante plugged the USB drive into his laptop while Marco stood guard at the door. $12 million is enough to buy safety or get you killed, depending on how you use it. The drive contained exactly what Russo had described: detailed account information for offshore banks, access codes, transfer records. It was a complete map to money that had been stolen from 5 different criminal families, and it was all sitting in Alina's hands like a bomb waiting to explode. "What do we do with it?" Alina asked quietly. Dante stared at the screen, at the numbers and codes that represented power and danger in equal measure. He could use the information to buy peace, return the money to the families Russo had stolen from, negotiate Alina's safety as part of the deal. Or he could use it as leverage to consolidate power, to make himself untouchable and eliminate the threat of Salvator and everyone else who'd ever thought about coming after him. But both options meant making choices that would define Alina's future, and he wasn't sure he had the right to make those choices for her. "It's your money," he said finally. "Russo left it for you, which means the decision about what to do with it is yours." Alina looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "I'm a nurse. I make $43,000 a year. I have no idea what to do with $12 million, especially when it's stolen from the Mafia. Then I'll tell you your options." Dante turned away from the laptop. "Option 1. We give the money back to the families Russo stole from, including mine. We negotiate your safety as part of the return, and we hope that satisfying their greed is enough to make them leave you alone. And Option 2? Option 2. We keep the money and use it to build you a new life somewhere far away from Chicago and Miami and anyone who knows your name. New identity, new city, new everything. You disappear, and you never look back."